And I'd like to now move on to our third panelist, final panelist, Martine Rothblatt, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years. She's a serial entrepreneur, and I come from a very unique background, again, into healthcare eventually, but I started out as in the media business, Sirius XM radio, which was something that I listened to growing up. And later we had a chance to connect at United Therapeutics, which is a leading biopharmaceutical company in the pulmonary hypertension space. What you bring to bear really is that deep commitment and passion to things you sense as can serve human needs and that have really global potential. Also as a co-founding investor and supporter and donor into the Healthy Longevity Grand Challenge, it's been great to partner with you at multiple levels and really appreciate your stewardship. So without further ado, Martine.
Thank you, Eugene. And thank you to the National Council for inviting me to join the discussion this morning about partnerships, corporate, public partnerships. And I'd like to speak about our own experience at United Therapeutics with the success of this model. In the time allotted this morning, I'd like to focus on the topic of organ transplantation, which people generally regard as a area desperately in need of innovation, with well over 100,000 Americans alone on the organ transplant list, and many more people suffering from end-stage organ disease and not even able to access the organ transplant list at all. The situation is comparable everywhere in the world. So with regard to this trying to do something better in organ transplantation, we've had a great deal of success with the academic corporate partnership model. And the first example I'd like to give of that is our partnership with two of the leading medical centers in North America, Toronto General Hospital in Canada, and the Mayo Clinic in the United States. A brilliant heart and lung transplant surgeon, Dr. Shaf Kashavji at Toronto General Hospital, invented a technique whereby lungs that had been donated for transplant, but for a number of reasons were not going to be able to be transplanted, could be put sort of in a state of biostasis for several hours. And this state of biostasis is called ex vivo lung perfusion. The lung is kept ventilated and perfused outside of the donor's body. And during this several-hour period, a number of things can occur which allows an organ that was kindly, generously donated, but not able to be used, to in fact be used with an ability to save several hours of time. And during these hours, sometimes it's necessary to get the transplant team and the patient who needs the lung to the right location. Sometimes it's necessary during this time to clear the lung of accumulated mucus and other biological detritus of just the dying process. Generally speaking, the lung will be the last major organ and that is explanted from a decedent who is granted the gift of life to other people. And once the kidneys, liver, heart, etc., are explanted by that point in time, the lung certainly often needs several hours of concentrated work outside of the body under this dome that Dr. Kashavji had invented. Well, as an academic working at one of the world's leading lung transplant surgeons, Dr. Kashavji was in a great place to actually invent a new technology that could save hundreds and hundreds of lungs for transplantation, but was perhaps not in the best place to sort of bring the technology to much wider application. And so Toronto General partnered with our company, United Therapeutics, to create centralized locations in the United States where decedent lungs that were not able to be transplanted immediately could be flown to centralized locations. Skilled technicians would work on those lungs for several hours, establish an ability for transplant surgeons throughout North America to visualize the lungs inside, out, radiography, all in real time, and make a decision if whether or not they wanted to use that lung for transplant. If after several hours of cleaning and nurturing and ventilating and perfusing a lung that at the beginning was not transplantable, after several hours would become transplantable, we then could cool the lung back down and fly it out yet again to another transplant hospital. So we have now done this hundreds of times in partnership with the Mayo Clinic and other transplant centers throughout the United States. We established a centralized ex vivo lung perfusion center in a partnership with the Mayo Clinic. And I think everybody involved in the process, and certainly the transplant centers, the nurses, their teams, the patients, their families, have all been enormously grateful that we've been able to actually increase the supply substantially of transplantable lungs by virtue of this public-private partnership between United Therapeutics and the Mayo Clinic. Another example of the tremendous power of public-private partnerships is in the area of xenotransplantation. This is the practice of transplanting genetically modified pig organs into people to save their lives and to help make a dent in the huge shortage of transplantable organs. Earlier this year, in January, headlines were made when the life of the first person, a patient at University of Maryland Medical Center, was saved by the use of a genetically modified heart transplant that came from United Therapeutics. Now, this set of genetic modifications of the heart was possible only because of a public-private partnership between the NIH, United Therapeutics, and University of Maryland. And in working together with University of Maryland, we were able to step-by-step make enough modifications in the pig genome that a graft or a heart from that pig with the modified genome would not be at least acutely and certainly not hyperacutely rejected by the recipient. And this was in fact proven in the historic heart transplant that occurred in January at University of Maryland with Mr. David Bennett, the very brave pioneer who agreed to accept that xeno heart. Unfortunately, Mr. Bennett did ultimately succumb to a number of his medical conditions after a period of 2 months. But even after 2 months, this public-private partnership between United Therapeutics and University of Maryland had proven for the first time in humans that genetically modified porcine organs, if genetically modified in the appropriate way, with the appropriate number of genetic modifications, would not be rejected, at least over a period of 2 months, in a human recipient. That was a historic achievement that would, I think, have been impossible for a private company to have done on their own, probably would have been impossible for a public entity to have done on their own. One needs to raise a herd of hundreds of genetically modified pigs, and to do this in a way that has the pigs breeding homozygously, the genetic modifications. So it was uniquely a public-private partnership that made this kind of historic event of a xeno heart transplant into a living person possible. Another couple of examples of successful public-private partnerships that we've been able to participate in are the partnerships with NYU Langone Medical Center and the University of Alabama Birmingham Medical Center. In these cases, what was desired was to create a new type of capability to test genetically modified xenokidneys in a human body to assure ourselves that there was no process of acute or hyperacute rejection with these genetically modified xenokidneys. Now, kidney failures is one of the largest problems in the world. There are over 100,000 Americans on the kidney transplant list, but many people are not aware that there are over 400,000 people on dialysis. So 3 out of 4 people who are suffering from end-stage renal disease and could have their lives saved off of dialysis with a kidney transplant are not even on the kidney transplant list. So this is just a gigantic unmet medical need. What we did as a public-private partnership is we were able to construct at both NYU Langone and at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, a specialized center where organ donors who had generously agreed to give the gift of life upon their demise, for various reasons, their organs could not be transplanted into helping other people. Oftentimes, it's really due to a wide variety of problems. But when the organ procurement organizations in New York and Alabama, respectively, asked the patients' families, would they consent to a donation of the entire body so that manufactured xenokidneys could be tested in the body. And in this way, they could kind of give or help to give a gift of life, not just to 1, 5, or 10 people through organ donation, but potentially for tens of thousands of people in the future with an unlimited supply of transplantable xenokidneys, xenohearts, and so on. So the patients' families, 4 times in both Alabama and New York, agreed to kindly donate their loved ones' bodies to this historical effort to prove that xenokidneys would not be acutely rejected in a human body. The human bodies were maintained in a ventilated and perfused state for several days while these tests went on. And the results have all now been published in leading peer-reviewed journals, proving that with these multiple genetic modifications, xenografts will not be rejected in human bodies, at least not acutely. So these are just absolutely fantastic accomplishments, June, that have been only made possible through a public-private partnership. It's not really logical or likely that a hospital would create this type of organ research facility on their own. They certainly would not have the supply of genetically modified xenografts. And then now we are in the processes of preparing for FDA-approved clinical trials so that the fruits of these public-private partnerships can be made available to literally tens of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world. I'd like to quickly wrap up with one other example of a fantastic public-private partnership that I think exemplifies so much the power of this paradigm. And that is our public-private partnership with the National Cancer Institute. The National Cancer Institute and its Children's Oncology Group network conducted a trailblazing study of a monoclonal antibody known as dinutuximab as a treatment for patients with neuroblastoma, which are almost all pediatric patients and face a very high prospect of death if not treated, and unfortunately a devastating and rapid one. So the NCI and the Children's Oncology Group conducted this trial, showed very clearly that dinutuximab slashed the death rate in half for pediatric patients with neuroblastoma, and that furthermore, that the cancers did not come back even a year, 2 years, et cetera, after the course of treatment. But how was the National Cancer Institute and the Children's Oncology Group really going to get this medicine approved by the FDA and distributed to people who needed it? It's a very difficult medicine to make, and the distribution and delivery process is not easy. So we formed a public-private partnership with NCI and the Children's Oncology Group, where we continue to fund research by the Children's Oncology Group. We built a manufacturing facility to create this MAB, which now goes by the name Unituxin, and conducted follow-on studies So now over 100 children's lives each year are permanently cured of neuroblastoma. The neuroblastoma does not come back even 5 years after the course of treatment in 50% of the cases. And we remain committed to making Unitoxin available to the children's oncology centers throughout the United States and continuing the research. So I hope I've been able to show June this morning that through these multiple examples, practical, real life, actual, real time, even examples of public-private partnerships, that this is a fantastic model for moving medical, biotechnology, and health science forward.
Well, thank you for that great example of the kind of public partnership that Anne was talking about earlier, and also being a living example of an inventor who's parlayed it into innovation that Mahmoud talked about. Really appreciate that.